"Hold on," Thomas whispered. "Please, son. Just hold on." But even as he said the words, he knew they were empty. There was nothing left to hope for. The best doctors in the world had failed. This was the end, and all Thomas could do was sit here and watch his son slip away, paying the price for a lifetime of putting business before family, power before love. He didn't know that downstairs, a tired young woman in a faded red jacket was about to climb the stairs toward a sound only she could hear. He didn't know that divine favor worked in mysterious ways, often through the most unlikely people. He didn't know that sometimes the answer to desperate prayers came not from the expected places of wealth and credentials, but from humble hearts that had learned wisdom through suffering. All Thomas knew was darkness and despair. But that was about to change. Grace Bennett's hands shook slightly as she set the soup container on the kitchen counter. The Mitchell Estates kitchen was bigger than her entire apartment had been before the eviction notice. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and a wine fridge that probably cost more than her car. She delivered to plenty of wealthy homes in Nashville during her year as a delivery driver, but this place was something else entirely. Margaret, the kind-faced housekeeper, handed her a key to the bathroom. "Down the hall, second door on the left. Take your time, dear. You look worn out." "Thank you so much," Grace said, genuinely grateful. 12-hour shifts were brutal, especially when you were running on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar. But bills didn't pay themselves, and Katie needed new shoes for school. Again. 7-year-olds grew fast. Grace used the bathroom, marveling at the heated marble floors and the fancy soap that probably cost more than her hourly wage. She washed her hands and face, trying to scrub away the exhaustion. 2 more deliveries after this, then she could go home to Mrs. Patterson's apartment where Katie was staying. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, watched Katie when Grace worked late, refusing payment but always accepting the groceries Grace brought her. As Grace dried her hands on a towel softer than any blanket she owned, she heard something. A sound from upstairs. A low, painful moan that made her freeze. That sound. She knew that sound. Her grandmother had made sounds like that during her final years, when the seizures came. Grace had been Katie's age then, living with her grandmother in rural Tennessee after her parents died in a car accident. She'd learned to recognize the warning signs, learned what helped and what didn't. The doctors had given her grandmother pills that barely worked, but there were other things, old remedies passed down through generations, pressure points and herbs that her grandmother swore by. Grace told herself to walk away. This wasn't her business. These people had money for proper medical care. She was just a delivery driver who needed to get back to work. But the sound came again, filled with such pain that Grace's feet moved before her brain caught up. She found herself climbing the curved staircase, following the sound to a door at the end of a long hallway. The door was slightly open, warm light spilling out. She shouldn't. She really shouldn't. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. When you see someone suffering and you have knowledge that might help, turning away is the same as causing harm. Grace pushed the door open and stepped inside. The man in the chair looked up, his face haggard with grief and exhaustion. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with silver streaking his dark hair. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loose. But it was the young man in the bed who caught Grace's attention. He was in the grip of some kind of episode. His hands clenched and unclenched. His breathing came in sharp gasps, and his eyes were rolling back. Grace recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't a typical seizure. This was something else, something her grandmother used to call the body forgetting itself. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, standing abruptly. "How did you get up here?" "I'm sorry," Grace said quickly, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from Ethan. "I heard him, and I'm the delivery driver. I'm so sorry for intruding, but I think I might know what's happening to him." Thomas's expression shifted from anger to desperate hope, so quickly it was painful to watch. "You know what's wrong with my son." "I'm not a doctor," Grace said carefully, stepping closer to the bed. "But my grandmother had episodes like this." The doctors couldn't figure it out either. They gave her all kinds of medicine, but nothing worked until she went back to old remedies her mother taught her. "Old remedies," Thomas repeated, and Grace could hear the skepticism. Who could blame him? She probably looked ridiculous in her delivery uniform, claiming she could help when 1,000 doctors had failed. But Ethan moaned again, his body tensing, and Grace's instincts overrode her common sense. She moved to the bedside, gently taking Ethan's hand. His skin was hot and clammy. "Look at how he's breathing," Grace said, pointing. "Short gasps, like he can't get enough air, but it's not his lungs. It's his nervous system. And see how his left hand is curling differently than his right? That's not random." Thomas leaned forward, studying his son's hands. "What does it mean?" "With my grandmother, it meant her body was getting signals crossed. Like wires touching that shouldn't touch. The doctors called it idiopathic, meaning they had no idea what caused it. But my grandmother's mother knew. She said sometimes the body needs help remembering how to work right." "How do you help it remember?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace hesitated. This was crazy. She had no medical training beyond basic first aid. But looking at this young man suffering, looking at his father's desperate face, she couldn't walk away. "There are pressure points," she said, "and a tea my grandmother made from specific herbs. It sounds insane, I know, but it's the only thing that ever helped her. When she used the remedies, she could go weeks without an episode. When she didn't, they came every few days." "We've tried everything," Thomas said. "Everything. If there's even a chance you know something that could help him, please. I'm begging you." Grace looked into this powerful man's eyes and saw something she recognized, the look of someone who'd been broken by watching someone they love suffer. She'd worn that look herself when her grandmother was dying, when every doctor gave up, when she'd been a frightened teenager holding her grandmother's hand and praying for miracles. "I'd need certain things from your kitchen," Grace said. "Chamomile, valerian root if you have it, passion flower, and lemon balm. And I'd need to try the pressure points my grandmother taught me." "Margaret," Thomas called, loud enough to be heard downstairs. The housekeeper appeared within seconds. "Get whatever she needs. Anything. Check every store in Nashville if you have to." Margaret looked confused but nodded. Grace quickly wrote out a list, her handwriting shaky. This was insane. She should be in her car, heading to the next delivery. Instead, she was about to try folk remedies on a dying man in a mansion. But as Ethan's breathing hitched again and his father gripped the bed rail with white knuckles, Grace remembered her grandmother's words. "God puts people where they need to be, when they need to be there. Trust that." "I'll do my best," Grace said quietly. "But Mr. Mitchell, you have to understand, I'm not promising anything. I'm just a delivery driver who learned some things from her grandmother. If this doesn't work—" "It will work," Thomas said with absolute conviction. "It has to." Grace wished she had his certainty. All she had was faith, hope, and the memory of her grandmother's gentle hands teaching her to read the body's signals, to listen when modern medicine had stopped knowing what to say. 20 minutes later, the Mitchell estate's kitchen smelled like Grace's grandmother's house. The tea steeped in a crystal mug that probably cost more than Grace made in a week. Margaret had found everything on the list in record time, even the valerian root, though she'd had to wake up a neighbor who grew medicinal herbs. Grace carried the steaming mug upstairs, her heart pounding. What if this didn't work? What if she made things worse? She wasn't a healer. She was a 26-year-old single mother who could barely keep her own life together. But Thomas Mitchell stood in that doorway with such desperate hope in his eyes that turning back wasn't an option. "The tea needs to be drunk slowly," Grace explained, entering the room. "Small sips over 20 minutes. And while he drinks, I'll work the pressure points." Thomas helped lift Ethan's head. The young man's eyes were half closed, his breathing still labored. Grace held the mug to his lips. "Ethan," she said softly, "my name is Grace. I know you don't know me, and I know you're in pain. But I'd like to try something that helped my grandmother. Just trust me for a few minutes, okay?" To her surprise, Ethan's eyes focused on her briefly. Something flickered there, maybe recognition that she was trying to help. He took a small sip of the tea and didn't fight it. Grace set the mug on the nightstand and took Ethan's left hand. "This might feel strange," she warned, "but it shouldn't hurt." Her grandmother had taught her these pressure points when Grace was 12. They'd practiced on each other, Grace's small fingers learning to find the exact spots where gentle, sustained pressure could affect the nervous system. Modern medicine might scoff at it, but Grace had seen it work too many times to doubt. She pressed her thumb firmly into the webbing between Ethan's thumb and forefinger, holding it there while counting slowly to 30. Then she moved to a point on his wrist, another on his inner elbow. With her free hand, she gave him another sip of tea. Thomas watched silently from the corner. Grace could feel his eyes on her, could sense his desperate hope. It made her hands steadier. She couldn't let him down. She couldn't let Ethan down. After 15 minutes of working the pressure points on Ethan's arms and hands, Grace moved to his feet. She removed his socks and found the pressure points her grandmother had called the reset buttons. One on the arch of each foot, held for a full minute each. Ethan's breathing began to change. The harsh gasps smoothed out. His body, which had been rigid with tension, started to relax. Grace hardly dared to breathe herself. "Keep talking to him," she told Thomas. "Let him hear your voice. It helps ground him." Thomas moved closer, taking his son's free hand. "I'm here, Ethan. Dad's right here. You're going to be okay. This young woman is helping you. Just hold on." Grace finished the pressure points and lifted the mug again. "Last few sips," she said gently to Ethan. "You're doing so good." He drank the rest without resistance. Grace set the mug aside, and then did something her grandmother had always done at the end. She placed both hands on Ethan's chest, over his heart, and spoke quietly. "Your body knows how to work. It just forgot for a while. But you're remembering now. You're going to be okay." It wasn't medical. It wasn't scientific. But her grandmother had sworn that intention mattered, that the body responded to gentle command from a caring heart. Ethan's eyes closed, and for a terrifying moment, Grace thought she'd made everything worse. But then his breathing evened out completely. His face, which had been tight with pain, relaxed. And he slept. Not the fitful, gasping sleep of before. Real sleep. Peaceful sleep. Thomas stared at his son, then at Grace, then back at his son. "What did you do?" "I don't really know," Grace admitted. "My grandmother said it was about helping the body remember its natural rhythms. The tea relaxes the nervous system. The pressure points sort of reset the signals. At least, that's how she explained it to me. I was just a kid. I didn't understand the science, if there even is science to it." "His color is better," Thomas said, moving closer. "Look, he's not pale anymore." It was true. The grayish pallor had faded from Ethan's skin. His breathing was steady and deep. As they watched, he shifted slightly in the bed, a normal movement, not the jerky spasms from before. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "He might wake up in a few hours," she said. "When he does, he should have more tea. 3 times a day for the first week. And the pressure points should be done morning and night." "Show me," Thomas said immediately. "Show me how to do it." So Grace spent the next 20 minutes teaching Thomas the pressure points, where to press, and how long to hold. He was a quick student, his hands surprisingly gentle despite their obvious strength. "I can write it all down," Grace offered. "The tea recipe, the pressure points, everything." "Would you stay?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Just for tonight. In case he wakes up and needs you." Grace thought of Katie, asleep at Mrs. Patterson's apartment. Thought of the 2 remaining deliveries she was supposed to make. Thought of her ancient car that barely ran and her phone that was held together with tape. But looking at Ethan's peaceful face, at Thomas's desperate gratitude, she couldn't say no. "I should call my daughter's babysitter," Grace said. "Let her know I'll be late." "Use my phone," Thomas offered. "And Grace, whatever your delivery job pays, I'll triple it. Just for tonight. Please." Grace made the call to Mrs. Patterson, who assured her Katie was fine and sleeping soundly. Then she settled into an armchair by Ethan's bed, prepared to keep watch through the night. Thomas sat on the other side of the bed, never taking his eyes off his son. Around midnight, Ethan stirred and opened his eyes. Really opened them, clear and focused for the first time in weeks. He looked at his father, then at Grace, confusion crossing his face. "Dad." His voice was hoarse but coherent. "Who is this?" Thomas's face crumpled with relief. "This is Grace, son. She's an angel. She's helping you get better." "I'm not an angel," Grace said quickly, embarrassed. "Just someone who learned a few things from her grandmother." Ethan's eyes closed again, but this time when he slept, Thomas was smiling through his tears. Grace watched the sun rise through the window, painting Nashville's skyline in shades of pink and gold. She thought about divine favor, about being in the right place at the right time, about how sometimes the answers to the biggest problems came from the simplest places. And she prayed that this wasn't just a temporary improvement, that Ethan would continue to heal, that she hadn't given this desperate father false hope. She didn't know yet that this night would change all their lives forever. She didn't know that kindness, once given freely, would return to her 1,000-fold. She just knew that she'd helped someone, and that was enough. By noon the next day, the Mitchell estate buzzed with activity. Dr. Cole had returned, bringing 2 colleagues with him. They surrounded Ethan's bed with equipment and instruments, taking readings and samples while Thomas hovered nearby and Grace sat quietly in the corner, feeling increasingly out of place. "His vitals are completely stable," Dr. Cole said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yesterday he was in critical condition. Today he's sitting up and talking. I've never seen anything like this." Ethan did look better. He'd eaten actual food for breakfast, soup and toast that he kept down without issue. His color was good. His eyes were clear. He still looked thin and weak, but there was life in him again. "Tell them exactly what you did," Dr. Cole said to Grace. "Everything." Grace repeated the explanation about the tea and pressure points, feeling self-conscious as the doctors exchanged skeptical glances. She knew how it sounded. Folk medicine and pressure points weren't exactly cutting-edge treatment. "I'm not saying it's a cure," Grace added quickly. "My grandmother still had episodes sometimes. But they were less severe and less frequent when she used these methods. Maybe they just gave Ethan's body a chance to rest and heal on its own." Dr. Cole's colleague, a neurologist named Dr. Patricia Sanders, examined Ethan's hands where Grace had pressed the pressure points. "There's actually some scientific basis for this," she said thoughtfully. "Certain pressure points can stimulate the vagus nerve, which affects the parasympathetic nervous system. And these herbs you used, they are known to have calming properties that could potentially help with neurological issues." "So it's not just superstition?" Thomas asked. "I wouldn't go that far," Dr. Sanders said carefully. "But there's growing research into integrative medicine. The combination of stress reduction, herbal supplements, and vagal nerve stimulation could theoretically create conditions where the body's natural healing processes work more effectively." Grace didn't fully understand the medical terms, but she understood the gist. Maybe what her grandmother taught her had some real science behind it, even if they'd explained it differently. "Whatever the mechanism," Dr. Cole said, "the results speak for themselves." "Ethan, how do you feel?" "Tired," Ethan admitted. "Like I've been running marathons in my sleep. But it's different from before. Before, I felt like I was drowning and couldn't reach the surface. Now I just feel weak, like I'm recovering from a bad flu." "That's significant," Dr. Sanders said. "The subjective experience matters. If you feel like you're recovering rather than deteriorating, that's a very good sign." As the doctors continued their examination, Margaret appeared at the door and gestured for Grace. "Miss Bennett, can I speak with you downstairs?" Grace followed her to the kitchen, where Margaret had set out a sandwich and coffee. "You need to eat, dear. You've been up all night." "Thank you," Grace said gratefully, realizing she was starving. "I should probably get going soon, though. I have work tonight." "Mr. Mitchell wanted me to talk to you about that." Margaret poured coffee into a mug and handed it to Grace. "He'd like to offer you a position here at the estate. As Ethan's companion during his recovery. Someone who can prepare the tea, do the pressure points, help him with exercises as he regains his strength." Grace nearly dropped her coffee mug. "I'm not qualified for that. I'm a delivery driver. I don't have any credentials." "You have something better," Margaret said gently. "You have knowledge that helped when nothing else did. And you have a kind heart. Mr. Mitchell is prepared to offer you $70,000 a year, plus free housing in the guest house for you and your daughter." $70,000. Grace made $22,000 a year working 3 jobs. And housing? She'd just received an eviction notice. She and Katie had 3 weeks to find a new place, and every apartment she could afford had a waiting list. "That's too much," Grace protested. "That's more than nurses make." "Mr. Mitchell knows what his son's life is worth," Margaret said. "And frankly, Miss Bennett, From what I've heard about your situation, you could use the help. Mr. Mitchell isn't the kind of man who forgets debts, especially not one this size. Grace thought about Katie, about being able to afford her school supplies without calculating every penny, about not working 3 jobs, about having time to actually be a mother instead of just survival mode all the time. But something made her hesitate. I don't want him to think I took advantage of his desperation. He doesn't think that, a voice said from the doorway. Thomas stood there, looking more rested than he had last night. Grace, may I speak with you privately? They walked out to the estate's garden, where roses bloomed in perfect rows and a fountain splashed musically. Grace felt incredibly out of place in her rumpled delivery uniform. I need to explain something to you, Thomas began. People in Nashville know me as the boss. It's not a nice nickname. I earned it by being ruthless in business. I've crushed competitors. I've made enemies. I've put profit ahead of people more times than I can count. I built this fortune by being hard and unforgiving. He paused, looking out over the garden. When Ethan got sick, I learned something. All that power, all that money, it meant nothing. I couldn't save my son. I was helpless. And in that helplessness, I made a promise. If Ethan survived, if by some miracle he got better, I would be a different man. I would use my resources to help people instead of stepping on them. You don't owe me anything, Gray started, but Thomas held up his hand. Let me finish. Margaret told me about your situation. Eviction notice. 3 jobs. Raising a daughter alone. And despite all that, you spend your free time volunteering at the homeless shelter and paying medical bills for people you don't even know. Grace's eyes widened. How did you know that? I have resources, Thomas said with a slight smile. I did a background check this morning. I hope you don't mind. What I found was remarkable. You're struggling to keep your head above water, but you're still helping everyone around you. That's not something I see often in my world. That's the kind of person I want around my son while he recovers. But $70,000 is less than what I spent on 2 days of consultations with one specialist who told me nothing helpful, Thomas interrupted. Grace, you gave me my son back. You gave me a second chance. I'm not paying you for a job. I'm trying to pay forward the gift you gave me. Let me do this. Let me help you the way you helped us. Grace felt tears welling up. She'd been struggling for so long, working herself to exhaustion, watching Katie go without things other kids had, eating ramen for dinner so her daughter could have a proper meal. The weight of it all had been crushing her slowly. I have one condition, Grace said finally. If I take this job, I want to keep volunteering. And I want to find ways to help other people with what I learn. If these remedies work for Ethan, maybe they could help others who've been failed by traditional medicine. Thomas's expression softened. I expected nothing less. In fact, I'd like to fund a clinic where you could do exactly that. We'll staff it with real doctors, but we'll also incorporate these traditional remedies. We'll help people who fall through the cracks of the medical system. You do that. Grace, yesterday I watched my son dying. Today he's sitting up and eating breakfast. You talk about divine favor? I'm looking at it right now. God put you in my house at the exact moment I needed you. The least I can do is make sure you never have to choose between paying bills and taking care of your daughter again. Grace broke down then, all the stress and fear and exhaustion of the past year pouring out. Thomas awkwardly patted her shoulder, clearly uncomfortable with emotional displays but trying his best. I'll take the job, Grace said when she could speak again. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, Thomas said firmly. Thank you. You saved my son's life. You gave me a chance to be better. That's worth more than any amount of money. As they walked back inside, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that's just barely hanging on, but the kind that believes things might actually get better. She didn't know that this was just the beginning. Didn't know how much her life was about to change. She just knew that for the first time since her grandmother died, she felt like maybe she wasn't alone in the world anymore. Maybe kindness really did come back around. Maybe divine favor was real. Katie Bennett pressed her nose against the car window as they drove through the gates of the Mitchell estate. Mommy, is this a castle? Not quite, baby, Grace said, smiling at her daughter's wonder. But it's going to be our home for a while. The guest house Thomas had offered them sat beside a small pond, hidden behind oak trees draped with Spanish moss. It had 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and more space than any apartment Grace had ever rented. Katie ran from room to room, her squeals of delight echoing off the hardwood floors. "I have my own room," Katie gasped. "With a real desk." "Yes, honey, your very own room." Grace felt tears threaten again. For 3 years, they'd shared a studio apartment, Katie sleeping on the couch while Grace took the Murphy bed. Before that, they'd bounced between shelters and friends' couches after Grace's ex-husband left them with nothing but debt. Margaret helped them carry in their belongings, which didn't take long. Everything they owned fit in 6 garbage bags and 2 cardboard boxes. Katie clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one toy she'd had since birth, its fur worn thin from washing and love. "Don't worry about furniture," Margaret said kindly. "Mr. Mitchell has already ordered everything you'll need. Beds, dishes, linens, clothes for both of you. They'll be delivered tomorrow." "That's too much," Grace protested automatically, but Margaret just smiled. "You'll learn that Mr. Mitchell doesn't do anything halfway. And honestly, dear, let him help. He needs this as much as you do. He's spent 20 years being hot and cold. Helping you is helping him become the person he wants to be." That evening, after Katie was asleep in her new bedroom, Grace walked up to the main house. Ethan was in the living room, sitting in a chair instead of lying in bed. It was remarkable progress for someone who'd been near death 2 days ago. "Hey," he said when he saw her. His voice was stronger than before. "Come sit. I wanted to thank you properly." Grace settled onto the couch, still feeling out of place surrounded by such luxury. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're feeling better." "My dad told me about your background check," Ethan said with a slight smile. "I hope you don't mind that we looked into you." "I understand. You don't know me. You needed to know if I was trustworthy. What we found made me feel like I should be thanking you even more. You've been through so much, and you're still helping people. That says a lot about who you are." Grace shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just do what I can. My grandmother always said that kindness costs nothing but means everything." She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She raised me after my parents died. Taught me everything about herbs and healing, about faith and hope. She used to say that God gave us 2 hands, one to help ourselves and one to help others. Ethan shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. Grace immediately stood. "Are you in pain? Do you need the pressure points done?" "Maybe in a bit. I'm okay right now. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about what happened to me. The doctors can't explain it, but maybe you can." Grace sat back down. "I don't have medical explanations. Just what my grandmother taught me." "Then tell me that. Because 6 months ago, I was healthy. I was running 5 miles every morning, working 12-hour days at my dad's company, living life. Then one day at a meeting, I just collapsed. And from that moment on, nothing was the same. The doctors ran every test imaginable. They found nothing wrong, but I kept getting worse." "Did anything happen right before you collapsed? Any stress? Any big changes?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I just closed a deal that put 300 people out of work. It was a good business decision. We bought their company, absorbed what we wanted, and shut down the rest. Very profitable. But I remember looking at those employees' faces when we announced the closure, and something inside me just broke." "Broke how?" "Like I realized I'd become my father. The old version of my father. Hard, calculating, caring more about profit than people. And I hated it. But I didn't know how to be different. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those faces. And the next day, I collapsed." Grace listened thoughtfully. "My grandmother believed that sometimes the body and spirit are connected more closely than we realize. She said that when we do things that go against our true nature, when we hurt others even if we think it's justified, it can make us sick. Not just emotionally, but physically. So you think I made myself sick with guilt? I think maybe your body was trying to tell you something your mind didn't want to hear. That you needed to change. That the path you were on was killing you, Literally. Ethan stared at her. That's exactly what it felt like. Like I was dying from the inside out. The pressure points and the tea, they didn't cure you, Grace said gently. They just gave your body a chance to rest so it could start healing. But the real healing has to come from inside. You have to become the person you're meant to be, not the person you thought you should be. How do I do that? Start by being kind. To yourself first, then to others. Find ways to help instead of hurt. Make different choices than the ones that made you sick. They talked for another hour. Grace sharing stories about her grandmother's wisdom, Ethan asking questions about healing and hope. When Grace finally returned to the guest house, she found Katie awake, looking out the window at the stars. "Mommy, did we get lucky?" Katie asked. "What do you mean, baby?" "Mrs. Patterson says sometimes people get lucky and good things happen. Is that what happened to us?" Grace hugged her daughter close. "I think it's more than luck. I think it's blessing. We've had hard times, but we kept being kind and helping people even when we had nothing. And now God is giving us a chance to rest and heal, just like Ethan." "I like it here," Katie said. "It feels safe." "It is safe, honey. We're going to be okay now. I promise." Over the next few days, they settled into their new life. Katie started at a new school, one with art programs and field trips and all the things Grace had never been able to afford. Grace spent her mornings with Ethan, teaching him gentle exercises, preparing his tea, working the pressure points. In the afternoons, she volunteered at the homeless shelter, bringing Katie with her, so her daughter would understand that having much meant responsibility, to give much. Ethan improved daily. He started walking around the estate, then short trips into Nashville. His color returned fully, the hollows under his eyes filled out, and his laughter, which Thomas said hadn't been heard in years even before the illness, echoed through the house. But more than his physical healing, Grace watched Ethan change in other ways. He started asking questions about the people who worked at the estate, learning their names and their stories. He joined Grace at the homeless shelter, sitting with veterans and listening to their experiences. He began researching ways to help the employees who'd lost their jobs in his last business deal. "You're turning my son into a softie," Thomas joked one evening, but Grace could hear the pride in his voice. "I'm not turning him into anything," Grace replied. "I'm just helping him remember who he really is." And in helping Ethan heal, Grace found herself healing too. The constant stress that had been her companion for years began to ease. She could breathe without calculating how many hours she needed to work to afford groceries. She could spend time with Katie without guilt about missing a shift. She could sleep at night without nightmares about eviction notices. But the best part was watching Katie bloom. Her daughter had always been quiet, withdrawn, careful not to take up too much space. Now she laughed freely, made friends, brought home stories about school plays and science projects. The weight of poverty that had pressed down on both of them was lifting, and underneath it, they were finding joy. One afternoon, Grace found Ethan and Katie in the garden, Katie chattering about her day, while Ethan listened with genuine interest. When Katie ran off to chase a butterfly, Ethan looked up at Grace. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me what matters. For reminding me that success isn't about money or power. It's about moments like this, connecting with people, making a difference in someone's day." Grace smiled. "You're learning fast." "I had a good teacher." And as Grace watched Katie laugh in the garden while Ethan smiled, as she felt the warm Nashville sun on her face, and knew that tonight she'd go home to a real home with her daughter, she understood something profound. Divine favor wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was simply being in the right place at the right time, having the courage to offer help, and the wisdom to accept help when it was offered in return. The healing had only just begun, but it was real. And it was enough. Are you moved by stories of unexpected generosity changing lives? Sometimes the greatest blessings come from simply being brave enough to help someone in need. What act of kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring tales that prove hope and love can transform everything. 3 weeks after Grace moved into the Mitchell estate, Ethan asked her to take a drive through Nashville with him. He was strong enough now to handle short excursions, though Grace still insisted he rest afterwards and have his evening tea. "I want to show you something," Ethan said as they drove through downtown. He directed her to a neighborhood Grace knew well, one where abandoned buildings lined streets filled with people who had nowhere else to go. "This is where I volunteer," Grace said quietly, pointing to the homeless shelter. "Every Wednesday afternoon." "I know. I've been watching you help people there. And I started thinking about what you said, about making different choices. So I want to run an idea by you." He pulled out a folder filled with architectural drawings and business plans. "What if we bought these 3 abandoned buildings and converted them? One into a medical clinic that combines traditional medicine with the herbal remedies you know. One into affordable housing for families transitioning out of homelessness. And one into a community center with job training programs." Grace stared at the plans, hardly believing what she was seeing. "This would cost millions." "I know. And I have millions that I made by hurting people. Time to use that money differently." Ethan's expression was serious. "But I don't want to do this without you. These people trust you. They know you've walked in their shoes. I'm just some rich guy who got sick and had an awakening. I need you to help me do this right." Over the next month, they worked together on the project. Grace introduced Ethan to the people she'd been helping quietly for years, people who lived in cars or shelters, who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford rent, who had medical conditions no one would treat because they had no insurance. Thomas, seeing his son's passion for the project, didn't just support it, he threw his full resources behind it. His construction company, which had built half of Nashville's skyline, renovated the buildings at cost. His business contacts provided donations and resources. The man who'd once been known as Ruthless the Boss was becoming known for something different, genuine care for the community. The medical clinic opened first. Grace worked with Dr. Sanders, who'd become fascinated by the integration of traditional and folk medicine. They hired 3 doctors and 2 nurse practitioners, but they also trained staff in the herbal remedies and pressure point techniques that had helped Ethan. On opening day, the line wrapped around the block. People who'd been turned away from emergency rooms, who couldn't afford specialist visits, who'd given up on traditional medicine, they all came. And they found help. Grace watched an elderly veteran break down in tears when they treated his chronic pain with a combination of medication and the pressure point therapy. She saw a young mother whose migraines had been dismissed by doctors find relief through the herbal teas and stress reduction techniques. She witnessed miracles, small and large, in people who'd lost hope. "You did this," Ethan said one evening, watching people stream through the clinic doors. "You turned my illness into something that's helping hundreds of people." "We did this," Grace corrected. "You had the resources. I just had the knowledge. And the heart. Don't forget that part." The affordable housing project opened next. 20 units for families, offered at 1/3 the market rate, with childcare on-site and job placement assistance. The first family to move in was a single mother with 2 kids who'd been living in her car. Grace helped her move in, remembering how close she'd been to that same fate. "I can't," Grace protested, looking at the fancy invitation. "I don't belong at events like that." "Neither did I, once," Ethan said. "My father grew up in a trailer park. He built his empire from nothing. There's no such thing as not belonging, Grace. That's just fear talking." So Grace found herself shopping for a dress with Margaret, who took evident joy in the experience. They found a simple but elegant blue dress, bright and cheerful like Ethan had suggested. Not black, not formal. Something that felt like Grace. The night of the fundraiser, Grace's hands shook as she applied minimal makeup. Katie, watching from the bed, said, "You look like a princess, Mommy." "Just a regular person in a nice dress, baby." But when Grace came downstairs and saw Ethan's expression, the way his eyes lit up, she felt like maybe Katie was right. The fundraiser was held at Nashville's historic Ryman Auditorium. Grace had driven past it hundreds of times during her delivery routes, but never imagined being inside. The space was filled with Nashville's elite, people who wore wealth as casually as Grace wore her delivery uniform. "Nervous?" Ethan asked, offering his arm. "Terrified," Grace admitted. "Just be yourself. That's all anyone worthwhile cares about." Ethan's speech was simple and honest. He talked about his illness, about losing his way, about how a delivery driver with her grandmother's wisdom had saved not just his life but his soul. He talked about the clinic, the housing project, the community center. He talked about how helping others had healed him more than any medicine could. "We call this giving back," Ethan said to the assembled crowd. "But that's not quite right. We're not giving back. We're giving forward, creating ripples of kindness that will spread far beyond what we can see." And none of it would have happened if one woman hadn't had the courage to offer help when she saw someone suffering. He gestured to Grace, and suddenly a spotlight found her. Hundreds of eyes turned her direction. Grace wanted to disappear. "Grace Bennett taught me that healing doesn't always come from the expected places," Ethan continued. "Sometimes it comes from the most unlikely sources. From folk wisdom and herbal teas and the simple act of caring. She showed me that real wealth isn't measured in money, but in the lives you touch. And I'm grateful every day that she walked into my father's house and refused to walk away from someone in pain." The applause was thunderous. People wanted to meet Grace, to ask about the clinic, to hear her story. By the end of the evening, 3 more businesses had committed to funding community projects, inspired by the Mitchell family's example. "See," Ethan said as they drove home, "you belonged. I was so scared I'd say something wrong. You were perfect, just like always." There was that intensity in his voice again, the look in his eyes that made Grace's stomach flutter. She changed the subject quickly, asking about plans for the youth center, but the awareness lingered between them. Over the following weeks, they fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were for Ethan's continued recovery, though he barely needed it anymore. Afternoons were for the various projects, visiting sites, meeting with people they were helping. Evenings often found them in the garden, talking as the sun set over Nashville. Grace learned about Ethan's life before the illness. How he'd dated socialites who cared more about his last name than who he was. How success had felt empty even as he achieved more. How he'd been searching for meaning without knowing it. Ethan learned about Grace's struggles. How she'd married young to someone who'd seemed stable but turned out to be abusive. How she'd left with nothing but Katie and hope. How she'd worked herself to exhaustion, trying to provide while maintaining the kindness her grandmother had instilled in her. "You're the strongest person I know," Ethan said one evening. "I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." "No, you're strong. Strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up every time you do." Katie adored Ethan. He played board games with her, helped with homework, listened to her endless stories about school. He was gentle and patient, everything a father should be. Grace watched them together and felt her heart ache with things she couldn't say. Thomas noticed, of course. One afternoon he called Grace into his office. "I see how my son looks at you," he said without preamble. "And I see how you look at him." Grace's face burned. "Mr. Mitchell, I would never." "I'm not concerned about propriety, Grace. I'm concerned about happiness. My son hasn't smiled like this since he was a child. And you've been carrying the weight of the world alone for too long. There's a difference between us. Money, class, everything. Those are just excuses. I grew up with nothing, remember. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong in your own life. But here's what I've learned. The only thing that matters is how people treat each other. Everything else is just noise." "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm just someone he's grateful to? What if I lose my job and my home and have to start over again?" Thomas's expression softened. "Fear is natural. But let me ask you this, what if it does work? What if you deny yourself happiness because you're afraid of what might go wrong? That's no way to live, Grace. You of all people should know that." That evening, Grace found Ethan in the garden again. He'd been spending a lot of time there lately, often just sitting and thinking. She almost turned away, not sure she was ready for whatever conversation might follow. But Katie's words from weeks ago echoed in her mind. "It feels safe here." Safety wasn't just about having a home. It was about being honest. About being brave enough to be vulnerable. "Can I join you?" Grace asked. "Always." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies dance over the pond. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I need to tell you something, and I'm afraid I'll mess it up." Grace's heart hammered. "Okay. When you first helped me, I was grateful. You saved my life, and that's not something you forget. But over these past months, it's become more than gratitude. You make me want to be better. You make me laugh. You see the world with hope despite everything you've been through. You're the best person I know, Grace. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Grace's breath caught. Ethan. I know there are complications. I know you work for my family, and there's a power imbalance there. I know I'm probably supposed to wait longer or be more careful about this. But life's too short and too precious to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel. I'm scared, Grace whispered. Of what? Of this being temporary. Of losing what we've built. Of Katie getting hurt if this doesn't work out. Of people thinking I was after your money all along. Let them think what they want. I don't care about any of that. I only care about you and Katie and building something real. Ethan took her hand gently. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to give us a chance. To stop fighting what's been growing between us. Grace looked at their joined hands, felt the warmth of his touch, and made a decision. Fear had ruled her life for too long. It was time to be brave. I love you too, she said quietly. I have for a while. I just didn't think I was allowed to. Ethan smiled, that brilliant smile that transformed his whole face. You're allowed everything, Grace. Happiness, love, rest, joy. All of it. You've earned it 1,000 times over. When he kissed her, soft and gentle under the Nashville stars, Grace felt something inside her finally release. The fear, the constant vigilance, the armor she'd worn for so long. She could be vulnerable here. She could be soft. She could accept love without waiting for the other shoe to drop. From the house, Thomas watched through the window and smiled. Some stories had happy middles, not just happy endings. His son was healed. Grace was safe. And love, the most powerful healing force of all, was blooming in his garden. The journey wasn't over yet, but it was going in the right direction. And that was enough. The Nashville Tribune ran the headline 2 weeks after Grace and Ethan went public with their relationship, delivery driver to dynasty, the Cinderella story that has Nashville talking. The article itself wasn't cruel, just detailed. It outlined Grace's background, her struggles, the timing of meeting Ethan. It mentioned the job offer, the guest house, the rapid progression of their relationship. The writer stopped just short of saying gold digger, but left readers to draw their own conclusions. Grace read it in silence over morning coffee, her hands shaking. Katie was at school. Ethan was at a construction site for the youth center. She was alone with the words that made her worst fears concrete. Some questioned whether Miss Bennett's timing was convenient, the article read. From facing eviction to living on a multi-million-dollar estate in less than 3 months, her story seems almost too fortunate to be coincidental. Her phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. She let them go to voicemail, but the messages piled up. Reporters wanting comments. Strangers with opinions. Some supportive, many not. Thomas found her an hour later, still sitting at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread in front of her. Don't read the comments, he said gently, taking the paper away. Nothing good ever comes from reading comments. They think I planned this, Grace said, her voice hollow. They think I heard about a sick rich man and saw an opportunity. People who don't know you might think that. People who do know you don't think it for a second. But the doubt had wormed its way into Grace's mind. Had she moved too fast with Ethan? Had she let herself fall for him because of what he represented, security and safety, rather than who he was? She wanted to believe her feelings were pure, but the article made her question everything. The comments online were worse. Grace knew she shouldn't look, but she couldn't help herself. People who'd never met her had strong opinions about her character, her motives, her worth. Some defended her. Most didn't. User 2847, classic gold digger move. Poor girl happens to cure rich guy? Sure. Nashville native, this whole thing smells fishy. Nobody goes from homeless to dating a millionaire without an agenda. Truth teller 91, feel bad for the guy. He was vulnerable and sick. She took advantage. Tale as old as time. When Ethan came home that afternoon, Grace was packing. What are you doing? he asked, standing in the doorway of the guest house. I think Katie and I should move out. Not far, just into our own place. I can still work at the clinic, but I don't think we should live here anymore. Because of a newspaper article. Because people are questioning your judgment. Because they think I'm using you. Because Katie doesn't need to grow up hearing people say her mother is a gold digger. Ethan sat on the bed, stopping her from packing. Grace, look at me. She couldn't. Tears were too close to the surface. Look at me, he repeated, gently turning her face toward his. I don't care what strangers think. I know who you are. I know what you've sacrificed to help people. I know that you've given more than you've taken every single day of your life. But what if they are right? What if subconsciously I let myself fall for you because you represented safety? So what if you did? Is that so wrong? You've been fighting to survive for years. Why shouldn't you want safety? Why shouldn't you accept when someone offers to help you? Because it makes people think I'm manipulative. People thought my father was ruthless. They thought I was spoiled. They thought our family only cared about money. People think lots of things. That doesn't make them true. Ethan took both her hands. I fell in love with you because you're kind and brave and genuine. You fell in love with me because, I hope, you see something in me worth loving. Everything else is just noise. What if this ruins your reputation? What if people stop supporting the clinic and the projects because they think I'm a bad influence? Then they weren't supporting them for the right reasons anyway. A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret stood there, looking upset. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at the clinic. Some protesters showed up with signs about Grace being a fraud. Grace felt her stomach drop. See? It's already starting. Then we'll handle it, Ethan said firmly. Come on. They drove to the clinic in tense silence. Sure enough, about 20 people stood outside with signs. Traditional medicine is fake medicine. Don't trust folk remedies. The Mitchell Clinic is a scam. But something unexpected was happening. The protesters were outnumbered by counter-protesters. People holding signs saying Grace saved my life. Folk wisdom saved my grandmother. The clinic helped when doctors wouldn't. Among them, Grace recognized faces. The veteran with chronic pain, standing tall despite his walker. The young mother whose migraines had disappeared. The homeless man who'd found dignity at the community center. Dozens of people the clinic had helped. One woman, elderly and dignified, was speaking to a news camera. I'm Dr. Patricia Sanders, neurologist at Vanderbilt. I've worked with Grace Bennett at the clinic for 2 months. Her knowledge of traditional remedies, combined with modern medicine, has helped patients that our traditional approaches couldn't reach. To call her a fraud is to deny the very real results we've documented. Grace watched, overwhelmed, as person after person stood up for her, told their stories, defended her character. People she'd helped, yes, but also people she'd never met who simply believed in what the clinic represented. The protesters slowly dispersed, outvoted and outnumbered by the community the clinic had built. See, Ethan said quietly, the people who matter know the truth. That evening, Thomas called a family meeting. Grace, Ethan, Katie, and Margaret gathered in the living room. I've been in business for 30 years, Thomas said. I've weathered scandals, bad press, and hostile takeovers. Here's what I've learned. You can't control what people say about you. You can only control what you do. And Grace, what you've done speaks louder than any article. But the comments, Grace started, are from people who don't matter. The people who matter are the ones at the clinic today. The families in the housing project. The kids at the community center. The hundreds of people whose lives you've touched. Those are the opinions that count. Mr. Mitchell is right, Margaret added. I've worked for this family for 20 years. I've seen Ethan date women who only cared about his money. You're not one of them, Grace. Anyone with eyes can see that. Katie, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Is someone saying mean things about Mommy? Grace pulled her daughter close. Some people are, honey. But it's okay. It's not okay, Katie said fiercely. You're the best mommy in the world. You help everyone. People are just jealous because you're happy now. Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought. Katie had summarized it perfectly. Some people couldn't stand to see others rise above their circumstances. They wanted everyone to stay in their designated box, playing their assigned role. Over the next week, things got worse before they got better. Another article ran, this one diving into Grace's ex-husband, painting her as someone who'd bounced between men looking for security. Never mind that she'd been alone for 3 years between her marriage ending and meeting Ethan. Never mind that she'd worked herself to exhaustion to support Katie independently. Grace's old co-workers from the delivery service were interviewed. Most defended her. A few didn't, perhaps seeing an opportunity for their own moment of fame. But through it all, Ethan never wavered. He held her when she cried. He stood beside her at public events. He made it clear to everyone who would listen, Grace Bennett was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and anyone who couldn't see that wasn't worth his time. The hottest moment came when Grace overheard some society women talking at a charity event. She's pretty, I'll give her that. Smart to snag him while he was vulnerable. My mother always said to marry up. She certainly took that advice. Did you see that dress? Trying so hard to look like she belongs. It's almost sad. Grace excused herself and locked herself in a bathroom stall, fighting back tears. She'd known this would be hard. She'd known people would judge. But hearing it out loud, hearing the mockery and suspicion in their voices, it hurt more than she'd expected. When she finally emerged, she found Thomas waiting outside the ladies' room. Margaret told me what happened, he said. Are you okay? I don't know if I can do this, Grace admitted. Maybe it would be better for everyone if I just stepped back. Found my own place. Worked at the clinic, but kept my distance from Ethan socially. That's fear talking. And I understand fear. But here's something those women in there will never understand, real value. You have it. They don't. They were born into money and think that makes them better. But money just amplifies what's already there. If you're kind, money lets you be kind on a bigger scale. If you're cruel, money just makes you a bigger problem. I'm not sure that helps, Grace said with a weak smile. What I'm trying to say is this, you belong wherever you choose to be. Not because of who you're dating, not because of where you live, but because you're a human being with inherent worth. Those women judging you have never worked 3 jobs, have never watched their child go hungry, have never sacrificed comfort to help a stranger. They don't get to define you, Grace. Only you get to do that. Grace hugged Thomas, this man who'd been transformed by his son's illness and her simple kindness. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't give up. Not on Ethan. Not on yourself. Love is worth fighting for. I should have learned that sooner myself. That night, Grace made a decision. She wouldn't hide. She wouldn't shrink. She wouldn't let other people's opinions dictate her life. She'd lived through poverty, abuse, loss, and struggle. She wasn't going to let gossip defeat her. She found Ethan in the garden, their spot, looking worried. I'm not leaving, she said. I'm not going to let fear or gossip or judgment separate us. Ethan stood, relief flooding his face. Are you sure? I'm sure. This won't be easy. People will talk. But what we have, what we're building, it's worth fighting for. When he kissed her, Grace felt something shift. She wasn't a victim of circumstance anymore. She was a woman making choices, claiming her right to happiness, refusing to be defined by others' limited imaginations. The storm wasn't over yet. But Grace had weathered worse storms than this. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't weathering it alone. Patricia Romano from the Nashville Tribune wasn't satisfied with the surface story. A seasoned investigative journalist with 25 years of experience, she'd built her reputation on finding the truth beneath the scandal. And the Grace Bennett story didn't sit right with her. Not because she thought Grace was guilty, but because she thought everyone else was wrong. Patricia spent 3 weeks following leads. She talked to Grace's former landlords, co-workers from all 3 of her old jobs, volunteers at the homeless shelter, staff at Katie's previous schools. She pulled public records, reviewed court documents from Grace's divorce, tracked down people from Grace's past. What she found surprised even her. The article ran on a Sunday morning under the headline, Nashville's Hidden Angel, The Truth About Grace Bennett. Thomas was the first to call. Grace, turn on your computer. You need to read this. Grace sat at her kitchen table, hands trembling as she pulled up the article. Ethan sat beside her, Katie on her other side. They read together. For weeks, Nashville has debated whether Grace Bennett is an opportunist who manipulated her way into the Mitchell family fortune. I'm here to tell you the truth. And it's a truth that should shame every person who rushed to judgment. Grace Bennett wasn't looking for a wealthy man to save her. Grace Bennett was too busy saving everyone else. In the 3 years before meeting Ethan Mitchell, Grace worked as a delivery driver, restaurant server, and night custodian. She brought home approximately $22,000 annually. During those same 3 years, according to records I obtained, she paid the medical bills of a homeless veteran, using money she'd saved for her daughter's birthday. The veteran, James Thompson, told me, "I was ready to die. I couldn't afford my heart medication." Grace found out, and the next day my prescription was paid for 3 months. I asked how I could repay her. She said to help the next person I saw struggling. So I did. She spent her 1 day off per week volunteering at 3 different charities: the Nashville Rescue Mission, Room at the Inn, and Second Harvest Food Bank. Staff confirmed she never missed a single week, even when she was sick. She fostered 4 elderly dogs over 2 years, paying for their medical care out of pocket, because the shelter couldn't afford treatment and was going to euthanize them. All 4 dogs lived out their final months in comfort because Grace refused to let them die alone. She regularly gave her last $20 to people on the street, then went without groceries for herself. Her daughter Katie never went hungry, but Grace herself often did. When her elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson fell and broke her hip, Grace paid for home care for 2 weeks from her emergency fund. That emergency fund was meant for Katie's school supplies. The list goes on. And on. And on. I spoke with dozens of people whose lives Grace touched. Not one had a negative word to say. Most broke down crying, remembering her kindness during their darkest times. "She paid my electric bill when I was about to lose power in winter," said Jennifer Moore, single mother of 3. "My kids would have frozen. I didn't even know her that well. She just heard about our situation at the food bank and showed up with cash. When I tried to thank her, she hugged me and said, 'We take care of each other.' That's what community means." This is who Grace Bennett is. Not a gold digger. Not an opportunist. A woman who gave away what little she had because she believed in helping others. So when she delivered soup to the Mitchell estate and heard someone in pain, of course she didn't walk away. That's not who she is. When Thomas Mitchell offered her a job and housing after she helped save his son's life, she hesitated. Multiple sources confirm she almost refused, worried it was too much. And when she fell in love with Ethan Mitchell, she fought it. She was terrified of people thinking exactly what they did think, that she was after his money. But here's what the cynics missed. Grace Bennett already was rich. Not in money, but in the kind of wealth that actually matters. She was rich in kindness, in compassion, in the ability to see suffering and respond with love rather than judgment. The Mitchell family didn't save Grace Bennett. They simply recognized what the rest of us should have seen all along, that she's extraordinary. I've covered scandal and controversy for 25 years. This isn't one of them. This is a story about how we as a society immediately tear down women who dare to rise above their circumstances. About how we question kindness, suspicious of any good fortune that comes to someone we deem undeserving. Grace Bennett deserves every good thing that's happened to her. And frankly, Ethan Mitchell is lucky she gave him a chance. To everyone who spread gossip, made assumptions, or questioned her character, you owe her an apology. But knowing Grace Bennett, she'll probably forgive you anyway. That's just who she is. Grace couldn't read through her tears. Katie hugged her from one side, Ethan from the other. The article continued with testimonials, with documented proof of Grace's generosity, with a dismantling of every accusation that had been leveled against her. Her phone started ringing again, but this time it was different. Apologies. Support. People who'd stayed silent before now speaking up. The Nashville mayor called, asking Grace to serve on a community outreach committee. A local university offered her a teaching position, wanting her to share her knowledge of traditional remedies. 3 more businesses contacted Thomas about funding similar projects. But the call that mattered most came from Patricia Romano herself. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Patricia Romano. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner. and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Grace asked, bewildered. "For what?" "For reminding me why I became a journalist. To tell the truth. To stand up for people who can't always stand up for themselves. Your story, the real story, needed to be told. Thank you for being patient while I found it." That afternoon, Thomas hosted a press conference. Grace didn't want to, but Ethan convinced her it was necessary. "People need to hear from you directly," he said. "Not to defend yourself, but to share your heart. That's what will really change things." So Grace stood beside Ethan and Thomas, facing cameras and reporters, and spoke from her heart. "I don't think I'm anyone special," she began, her voice shaking. "I'm just someone who learned from my grandmother that we're all connected. That when one person suffers, we all suffer. That when we help each other, we all rise. I've been where these people were. Hungry, desperate, hopeless. So when I had even a little to give, I gave it. Not because I'm a saint. Because I remembered what it felt like to be on the other side. When I met the Mitchell family, I wasn't looking for anything except to do my job. When I heard Ethan in pain, I followed my grandmother's voice in my head that said, never walk away from suffering. I didn't expect anything in return. I didn't want anything in return. But Thomas and Ethan, they insisted on helping me. And I learned something important. It's okay to accept help. It's okay to let people give back. It's okay to believe you deserve good things. For everyone who questioned my motives, I understand. Our world teaches us to be suspicious, to assume the worst. But I hope moving forward, we can all try to assume the best instead. To give people the benefit of the doubt. To celebrate when good things happen to good people instead of tearing them down. And for everyone who's struggling right now, who feels like they are drowning, who doesn't know how they'll make it through another day, hold on. Keep being kind. Keep helping others, even when you have almost nothing. Because divine favor is real. Blessings come. Sometimes from the places you least expect. The questions that followed were gentle, respectful. The tone had shifted. Nashville had heard the truth, and the truth had changed everything. That evening, the family gathered in the living room. Katie was playing with a puzzle, humming happily. Thomas was reading the positive press coverage with satisfaction. Ethan sat beside Grace, their hands intertwined. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm better than okay," Grace said. "I was so scared of what people thought. But now I realize their opinions can't change who I am. Can't change what we have. Can't touch what really matters. Which is love, family, purpose. Knowing that we're making a difference. That's all real. Everything else is just noise." Margaret brought in tea, the same herbal blend that had started everything. Grace sipped it, tasting chamomile and hope. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. So the article. "Always knew you were special. Proud of you, dear." Another from the homeless shelter. "You're trending on social media. #Nashville's Angel. The world finally sees what we always knew." And one from an unknown number. "You helped me 3 years ago. Paid my power bill. I never forgot. Just wanted you to know I got my degree and I'm a social worker now. Helping people the way you helped me. Thank you." Grace showed that last text to Ethan. This is what matters. Not the headlines or the opinions. The fact that kindness spreads. That it comes back around. "It more than came back around for you," Ethan said. "It brought you to us. It brought us all together," Thomas added. "You healed more than just Ethan, Grace. You healed this whole family. Showed us what would be missing." Katie looked up from her puzzle. "Are people going to stop being mean to Mommy now?" "Most of them," Grace said. "But some people will always be mean. That's okay. We know the truth. That's what counts. Can we have ice cream to celebrate?" Everyone laughed. Trust Katie to know what was really important. As they headed to the kitchen for ice cream, Grace looked around at this family she'd somehow become part of. At Thomas, who'd transformed from ruthless businessman to generous philanthropist. At Ethan, who'd found purpose and love through pain. At Katie, who was finally getting to be a kid instead of worrying about her mother. At Margaret, who'd become like a grandmother to them all. This was divine favor. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real. Because love had found a way through struggle. Because kindness had been rewarded. Because hope had not been in vain. The storm had passed. The truth had won. And the future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise. 6 months after Grace first delivered soup to the Mitchell estate, Nashville was covered in autumn colors. The clinic had helped over 500 patients. The housing project was full, with a waiting list and plans for expansion. The community center buzzed with activity every day. And the youth center had just opened, offering after-school programs and mentorship. But today wasn't about projects or philanthropy. Today was about something simpler and more profound: love. Ethan had asked Grace to meet him at the youth center's opening ceremony. She arrived with Katie, expecting another ribbon cutting, another celebration of the good work they were doing. Instead, she found the main hall transformed. White flowers covered every surface. String lights created a canopy of stars overhead. The families they'd helped filled the chairs, dressed in their best, smiling and whispering. And at the front of the room, beside a small platform, stood Ethan. His father beside him, Dr. Sanders, Patricia Romano, Margaret, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of other faces Grace recognized, people whose lives had touched hers. "What's happening?" Grace whispered to Katie, but her daughter just giggled and pulled her forward. Ethan stepped down from the platform, approaching Grace with the kind of smile that had become so familiar to her. The smile that said she was home. "Grace Bennett," he said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. "6 months ago, you walked into my life when I was dying. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. You saved me with tea and pressure points and grandmother wisdom. But more importantly, you saved me with kindness, with hope, with your unwavering belief that people can be better than they are. You didn't do it expecting anything in return. You did it because it's who you are. Because you see suffering and you respond with love. These past months, watching you help others, seeing the way you give and give and give, falling in love with your generous heart and your beautiful spirit, I've learned what it really means to be alive. Not just breathing, but purposeful. Not just existing, but making a difference. You've made me want to be worthy of you. To be the kind of man who builds up instead of tears down. Who gives instead of takes. Who loves without reservation or fear." Ethan knelt down on one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Grace, I don't care that we've only known each other 6 months. I don't care what anyone thinks about timing or propriety or any of it. I know what I feel. I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Katie. I know I want to build something beautiful together, a family based on love and kindness and all the values you've taught me. Will you marry me? Will you let me be Katie's father? Will you let me spend forever trying to give back even a fraction of what you've given me?" Katie squealed, bouncing on her toes. "Say yes, Mommy." Grace looked at Ethan, at this man who'd started as a stranger, became a friend, transformed into the love of her life. She thought about how far they'd both come, how much they'd both changed, how they'd healed each other in ways that went far beyond physical wellness. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes. Of course yes." The room erupted in applause as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It was simple and elegant, just like Grace herself. Not ostentatious, just beautiful. He stood and kissed her, and Grace felt the last piece of fear finally release. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. This was real. This was permanent. This was the kind of love songs were written about and fairy tales were based on. "I have one more surprise," Ethan said, taking her hand. "Everyone here, all these people whose lives you've touched, they've been working on something together. A gift." Patricia Romano stepped forward with a large folder. "Grace, we've established the Grace Bennett Foundation for Integrative Healing. It's fully funded for 10 years, with plans to open clinics in 5 more cities. Your grandmother's wisdom, combined with modern medicine, will help thousands more people. And all the profits from my article about you are being donated to it." Grace could barely see through her tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Patricia said. "Just keep being who you are." Thomas stepped forward next. "And Grace, I want you to know that whatever happens between you and Ethan, your position at the clinic is secure. The housing for you and Katie is secure. You'll never have to worry about survival again. That's not dependent on being with my son. That's because you've earned it. Because you're family now, regardless. But she is with me, Ethan interjected, pulling Grace close. And she's going to stay with me. Right. Forever, Grace said, laughing through tears. The celebration that followed was unlike any event Nashville high society had ever seen. It wasn't formal or stuffy. People from all walks of life mingled. Wealthy donors and homeless veterans, business executives and single mothers, doctors and delivery drivers. Grace had built bridges between worlds that rarely touched, and they were all here to celebrate love. Katie was a flower girl, Margaret announced, producing a basket of rose petals. Mrs. Patterson would walk Grace down the aisle. The wedding would be in 3 months, small and intimate, at the community center. Not a grand cathedral or country club, but the place that represented what they'd built together: community, hope, healing. As the evening wore on, Grace found herself alone with Thomas for a moment. He was watching Ethan play with Katie, the two of them laughing about something only they understood. "Thank you," Grace said quietly, "for accepting me, for trusting me with your son." "I should be thanking you," Thomas replied. "You gave me my son back, the real version of him, the good man he was meant to be. And you showed me that it's never too late to change, to be better, to use what you have to help instead of hurt." "We all changed each other," Grace said. "That's what love does. It transforms everyone it touches." "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, "when Ethan was sick, I was so desperate. I would have given anything, done anything, to save him. And then you walked into my house with soup and a kind heart, and you did what 1,000 doctors couldn't. Do you know why?" "The pressure points," Grace offered with a smile. "No. Because you saw him as a person, not a case. You treated him with love, not just medicine. That's the secret to healing, isn't it? Love. My grandmother used to say love is the most powerful medicine in the world. I think she was right." Later, as the party began to wind down, Ethan found Grace in the garden outside the youth center. It had become their tradition, finding quiet moments in gardens while the world moved around them. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Grace said honestly. 6 months ago, I was about to be evicted. I was working 3 jobs and barely surviving. Katie and I were one emergency away from homelessness. And now..." She gestured at the ring on her finger, at the building full of people celebrating, at the life they'd built. "Now we have all this." "You always had it," Ethan said. "You were always this person, generous and kind and strong. You were always worthy of good things. The circumstances just finally caught up with who you are. I still can't believe this is real sometimes." "Believe it. We're getting married. We're building a life together. We're raising Katie. We're helping people. And we're going to keep doing it, day after day, for the rest of our lives. What about when things get hard? When we argue or struggle? Then we'll work through it. Together. That's what love is, Grace. Not just the happy moments, but choosing each other even in the difficult ones." Katie came running out, followed by several other children from the housing project. "Ethan, come play tag with us." "Go," Grace laughed. "They need you." She watched Ethan chase the children around the garden, their squeals of delight filling the evening air. This man, who'd been dying 6 months ago, was now vibrant and alive, playing with children and planning a future. And she, who'd been drowning in poverty and fear, was now safe and loved, building something meaningful with her life. Divine favor. That's what this was. Not because they were perfect or because they deserved it more than others, but because they'd been open to it. Because they'd chosen kindness over bitterness, hope over despair, love over fear. The wedding 3 months later was perfect. Grace wore a bright red dress, Katie's choice, because Mommy looks beautiful in red. Thomas walked her down the aisle alongside Mrs. Patterson. The small community center chapel was packed with everyone they'd helped and everyone who'd helped them. The vows they wrote themselves were simple but profound. "I promise to always see you," Ethan said. "To choose you every day, in good times and bad. To help you carry your burdens and celebrate your joys. To be the father Katie deserves and the partner you need. To never take for granted the miracle of you walking into my life. I promise to keep growing with you, Grace said through happy tears. To challenge you to be better while accepting you as you are. To build a family based on love and kindness. To remember that we're stronger together than apart. To honor what we've been through and embrace where we're going. When they kissed as husband and wife, the entire room stood and cheered. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of transformation, of second chances, of love triumphing over every obstacle. The reception was held at the original clinic, the place where their mission to help others had begun. They danced their first dance to a song Katie had helped choose. They cut a cake baked by one of the housing project residents. They celebrated with a community they'd helped create. But the best moment came late in the evening. Grace and Ethan stepped outside for air and found themselves face to face with a young woman in a delivery uniform, holding food from the same service Grace used to work for. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I was told to deliver to this address, but it seems like a private event." "It's our wedding," Grace said with a smile. "But please, come in. There's plenty of food, and you're welcome to take a break." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You're Grace Bennett. I mean, Grace Mitchell now. I read about you. About how you were a delivery driver like me, and now." She gestured at the celebration. "I'm a single mother too, working 3 jobs. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning." Grace hugged this stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all. "I know exactly how you feel. Listen to me, it gets better. Keep being kind. Keep helping others. Keep hoping. Divine favor is real." "I want to believe that," the woman whispered. "Then believe it. Let me prove it to you." Grace turned to Ethan. "Honey, do we have any openings at the clinic? For the right person, we'll make one." Grace wrote her phone number on a napkin. "Call me Monday. We'll talk about a position and housing and getting you and your family the help you need, just like someone once did for me." The woman sobbed, clutching the napkin like it was made of gold. "Why? You don't even know me." "Because someone helped me when they didn't have to. And now I'm passing it forward. That's how this works. That's how we change the world, one act of kindness at a time." After the woman left, clutching the napkin and a bag of food from the reception, Ethan pulled Grace close. "You just hired someone at our wedding reception. I just paid forward what you and your father did for me. That's the whole point of this, isn't it? Using what we've been given to help others." "I love you so much," Ethan said. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Once or twice," Grace laughed. "But feel free to mention it again." As they returned to their reception, to Katie dancing with Thomas, to Margaret crying happy tears, to all the people they'd helped and who'd helped them, Grace felt a profound sense of peace. This was what her grandmother had meant about divine favor. Not that life would be easy or perfect, but that love would find a way. That kindness would be rewarded. That hope was never wasted. From poverty to purpose. From struggle to strength. From survival to significance. Grace had traveled that road, and now she was helping others travel it too. And as she danced with her husband under the clinic's lights, her daughter giggling nearby, her new father-in-law beaming with pride, Grace sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For second chances. For unexpected blessings. For the courage to help a stranger in pain. For the wisdom of a grandmother who taught her that healing comes in many forms. For a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. For all of it. Every struggle that had led her here. Every moment of doubt she'd pushed through. Every act of kindness she'd offered when she had nothing to give. It had all been worth it. Every single moment. As they returned to their reception, to Katie dancing with Thomas, to Margaret crying happy tears, to all the people they'd helped and who'd helped them, Grace felt a profound sense of peace. This was what her grandmother had meant about divine favor. Not that life would be easy or perfect, but that love would find a way. That kindness would be rewarded. That hope was never wasted. From poverty to purpose. From struggle to strength. From survival to significance. Grace had traveled that road, and now she was helping others travel it too. And as she danced with her husband under the clinic's lights, her daughter giggling nearby, her new father-in-law beaming with pride, Grace sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For second chances. For unexpected blessings. For the courage to help a stranger in pain. For the wisdom of a grandmother who taught her that healing comes in many forms. For a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. For all of it. Every struggle that had led her here. Every moment of doubt she'd pushed through. Every act of kindness she'd offered when she had nothing to give. It had all been worth it. Every single moment. Because love had triumphed. Hope had prevailed. And kindness, as it always does, had come full circle. Love had triumphed. Hope had prevailed. And kindness, as it always does, had come full circle.